Hey, it's Ed. I want to thank some new podcast supporters: Ben Clary, Eva Greenberg, Raleigh White, Joe Fitzsimmons, Kevin Chatham Stevens, Nick Vaughn, and Jennifer McKinney. All these folks signed up to support the podcast financially, and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to learn more about how that works and all the different options, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Iris Gardner. Iris is a writer, horse wrangler, mother, and former organic farmer who lives with her family on a homestead in northeastern Washington state. After many years of living and farming in Southern California, Iris, her husband Jason, and their 2 children moved to their current home, a rural property located close to the Canadian border and more than 2 hours from the nearest city. As you'll hear in our conversation, Iris and Jason have chosen to live and raise their children deliberately, with intention, and close to nature, in a beautiful landscape far removed from many of the so-called conveniences of modern life. Iris grew up off the grid in rural Washington, in an area so remote that her home did not have electricity. During her childhood, she developed a deep love of reading, horses, and wild landscapes, all passions that are still of great importance to her and her family today. Iris's husband Jason is a retired, highly decorated Navy SEAL who shares her devotion for intentional living and parenthood. Working as a team, Iris and Jason are building a meaningful and unique life for their family in the wilds of eastern Washington, a life that I've found both inspiring and instructional. Iris and I have been following each other online for years, so it was wonderful to finally get the opportunity to have a conversation. We spent a lot of time discussing parenting, how she's raising her kids to be both tough and compassionate, and how she balances managing risk with letting her kids learn from their own mistakes. We talk about her marriage with Jason and how they've grown as a couple through the various phases of their lives and careers. Iris is an enormously talented writer, and she's currently finishing up her first book. So we talk about her writing process, and she offers some excellent advice for people interested in pursuing creative endeavors. We also talk about the power of positivity, our shared love of reading, Iris's heroes and mentors, and Iris offers some very, very valuable words of wisdom. And also, if you want to learn even more about Iris's journey, I'd encourage you to watch or listen to her conversation with retired Navy SEAL Jocko Willink on the Jocko podcast. I've linked to it in the episode notes. You'll hear us reference Jocko often in our conversation, and that podcast episode is one of the most powerful conversations I've ever heard in my entire life. No exaggeration. Iris is a strong, inspiring, tough, talented, and thoughtful woman, and I know you'll enjoy our conversation. Thanks for listening. Maybe we could start out with you just describing where you are right now and where your property is. Because when we initially connected, you were in a completely different landscape, and now you're in, from the photos I've seen, just a really wonderful landscape. Can you talk about your property and where you are?
Yeah, we're just south of the Canadian border in the very northeastern corner of Washington state. And this is where I grew up, and I lived here off and on through my childhood, and then met my husband, and we moved down to Southern California, and we're down there for a long time, and then just moved back up here 2 years ago. So it's very rural. There's a small, very small town just about 15 minutes away that the kids go to school at. Yeah. And then the next closest town is an hour away. And that's also a very small town. And then it's 2.5 hours to a sizable city. So.
And how, I understand from our interactions on social media that, when you were in Southern California, you had like a real organic farm that you were working on that was part of what you did. And now, I imagine there's several feet of snow on the ground up there. So how has that transition been from two pretty opposite ends of the spectrum landscapes? I mean, has it been kind of a shock to the system, or I guess you grew up there, so it's kind of like returning home in a way?
I think it was more of a shock to a system when I moved to Southern California.
Yeah.
When I moved from up here in the north to Southern California and got some land and started a farm and just being able to grow things all year round. And, it's a very Mediterranean climate down there along the Mexican border where we were. And that was a real shock to the system. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and took me a long time farming to actually figure out how to grow things, because when you can grow things year round, it's just weird.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That is weird.
And the other thing is you never get a break. So I've actually come to really appreciate being up here in sort of the calm of winter, where everything stops. In the summer, you just go, go, go. There's always a million things going on. And then winter comes and it's like everything just slows down. And all of a sudden we start spending more time together. We start reading I read books to the kids. I'm reading The Lord of the Rings out loud to the kids right now because it's a big, thick series to get through. And we can do that in the winter. And we do puzzles and play board games and a lot more sort of close, intimate family time in the winter. And I'm really appreciating that slowing down after years of sort of the never ending workload of farming all year round in Southern California.
Oh yeah. And you mentioned your kids and we were talking before we started recording and there's so many different things that I admire about the life that y'all have built up there and the way you parent and the things you focus on. And it seems that y'all just have this real intentional approach to all aspects of life. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit. Maybe we just talk about the parenting a bit. And again, this whole podcast is completely selfish and it's just me trying to get to talk to people so I can get advice for my life. So I've got a lot of parenting questions for you, but so your kids, are they 8 and 9? Is that right? In that range?
8, and my daughter just turned 10. Just turned 10.
So when they were young, maybe 3, 4, 5 in that age, I mean, did you always have a plan of returning back to this area and living in a remote, rural area? Or was that something that maybe came up after they were born and you decided that you wanted them to have that type of upbringing? When did you make that decision?
Well, they've always had that. They were born, we had a farm in Southern California. We were an hour east of San Diego, right on the Mexican border, but it was a rural area. I mean, it was not as rural as where we are now, but just a tiny little town that just had a little general store and a post office and a little bitty school right on the border next to Tecate, Mexico. And so we had 18 acres and farmed. And so they were born into the rural life.
Got it.
But it wasn't the same kind of life as up here where we're just in the forest and the wilderness all the time and riding horses right out of the pasture and there's nothing else around. And so, yes, it was always important for me to have them experience farm life and all of that. But then I really had a longing as they got a little bit older to get them out to know even more of the wilderness and the more remote areas.
And you do a lot of writing, and I want to talk about some of your writing influences and your current writing project that you're working on. But you write, really impactful pieces about parenting and about the approach that you take with your children and raising them. And obviously you're very committed to raising them in a specific way that's going to, hopefully make them confident, quote, successful adults in whatever they choose to pursue. How did that come about, like from a parenting standpoint? I mean, were your parents pretty intentional about how they wanted to raise you? Or is that something that you and Jason decided as a family that, all right, we got to be super focused on this and we're going to have wilderness as a big part of how we raise our kids? And how did that kind of intentionality come about?
Oh, gosh, that's a hard question.
Is that what the book's about?
Well, I could say to an extent, yeah. I could say my parents were intentional in a way. They were very intentional in, I grew up without electricity for many years. We lived way out in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a television. We didn't have, I grew up in that sort of intentional environment where they wanted us to be raised. That's how they wanted to live. And so we were raised away from a lot of stuff that, we could have been pretty much Little House on the Prairie, it was.
Yeah.
But my parents kind of winged it as far as just raising kids went. So I think a lot of Jason and I's intentional behavior towards raising kids comes from the mistakes that our own parents made and how we wanted to do so much better than that, but also grounded in that sort of love and appreciation for the wide open spaces and the self-sustainability and things like that I actually did get from my parents.
That makes perfect sense. And so when you're thinking about kind of coming up with this system for raising your kids, it's clear that you read a lot and you read very widely. And I'm always impressed with how you're able to pull all these different quotes and different passages from just such a broad array of books. Are there any resources that you've come across in your life or maybe people that you've admired how they've raised their kids that serve as a role model? Or is it kind of like you pull all these different things from all these different sources and make your own?
I think it's pretty intuitive to me. It just seems based on my life. And you're right. I read a ton. I grew up, like I said, without electricity in the middle of nowhere. Books were fundamental to my development as a human being. And, when you read a lot, you take in so many different experiences and things from other people. And I just sort of have combined all of that into what looks like the right thing for me. And I take being a parent as a serious, I hate to say responsibility. That sounds like kind of a bad thing, but it's not a light thing to be a parent. This is a human being that you're putting out into the world, and I want to put out the best human being that I can.
Yep.
And so I just accumulate everything that seems right and good to me and implement that into parenting in the way that works.
One specific question I have about how you raise your kids is, it seems like there's a focus on, and this is one of my biggest focuses, is I want my girls to be tough, but I also want them to be compassionate. I don't want them to be bullies or anything like that, but I want them to be self-sufficient. And whenever it comes time for them to take off and go do their own thing, I want them to have just a confidence that allows them to be, tough in the world and not get pushed around. And whether that means, physically or following the crowd, doing stuff they may not want to do through peer pressure. I just want them to be confident and tough. And it seems like those are similar things that you're trying to instill in your kids, and so you, as you so bravely talked about on the Jocko podcast, which I'll have links to, and I encourage people to listen. You had a pretty dark childhood in a lot of ways. And, I would say one of the results of that came out is you're unbelievably tough. And then your husband is one of the most elite warriors in the history of mankind. And so that makes him tough. But how do you approach making your kids tough without them maybe having to endure some of the challenges that both you and Jason had to endure that led to your toughness? It's kind of a deep question, but I'm curious about it.
No, it's a great question. We're in this age of sort of both over-parenting and also a deep neglect of our children, I think, by shoving devices in front of them. And, everyone's walking around with their phone in their face and they stick an iPad in front of their kid. And at the same time, we over-parent by worrying, that any little thing is going to happen to our kid and we have to protect them from everything. And it's in sharp contrast to maybe when you and I were kids, and there was much more of a sense of just sort of letting everything work itself out. And, nobody wore seatbelts and everybody, all the way that like playground equipment has been replaced to be super boring and safe. And it's funny how from one generation to the next, things can change so much. Somewhere in the middle, lies the right answer. And that's what we always try to keep in mind with our kids, is to not be careless with them, but to also let them have a lot of freedom to experience life and to maybe get hurt a little bit and to have their own adventures and to be bored and to, my daughter, I've gone back and forth a lot over my kids wearing helmets when they ride horses. Mm-hmm. I didn't grow up wearing helmets. I never wore helmets. I rode horses my whole life and never wore helmets. So to me, I'm like, oh, you don't need a helmet. But then the other part of me says, it just makes sense that you put a helmet on your head, right? Anything can go wrong. And so I have her riding a horse who's not always great. He mm-hmm. can buck sometimes. He bolts sometimes. He's a young horse and he still has some issues. So I put a helmet on her head. Now, I could have her on an old dead nag who didn't do anything and not put a helmet on her head. And it's this balance that I deal with all the time of like, I love that she's riding a horse that could buck her off. Mm-hmm. I love that she is riding a horse that she has to pay attention and be on the top of her game with and actually learn to handle and control. That's the adventure. That's the growth right there, to face your fears when you go out and you get on your horse and you know that horse may bolt away from you and you have to deal with it. So in contrast to that, I'm going to slap a helmet on her head so that she can still have those adventures and have that feeling of freedom and fear, and also not crack her head open if something goes wrong. And everything with raising kids is like that. It's this balance of trying to keep them alive and also trying to let them have as much freedom and adventure as they can, because that's what builds strength. It's what builds resilience. It's what builds character. And when you take all of that away from them, you end up with a child who grows into an adult who has a lot of anxiety and fear of things, and who is scared to go try new things and doesn't feel fully confident in themselves because they've been sheltered from that their whole lives. And I think it's something that we really need to put a lot of focus in as parents, in letting our kids have as many experiences as possible. We live in a place where there's cougars and bears and wolves. There's all sorts of things all around us in the woods here. Mm-hmm. And we go out, the kids go out, they take the dogs with them and they go out on little walks where they'll be out together in the woods for a while. And they know, we've gone over all of the protocols on what to do. What do you do if you see a cougar? Mm-hmm. What do you do if you see a bear? How are you going to handle the situation? But then I actually give them the freedom to have that experience as long as they have like 3 dogs with them. I'm mitigating the risk. I'm saying, okay, there is basically a 0% chance that anything is going to happen to these kids mm-hmm. when they have 3 dogs with them. But they're out there experiencing that independence and the potential for something big and scary to happen to them that they have to deal with out in the woods without me hovering over them, ready to protect them from every little thing. And that is hugely important in both Jason and I's mentality for raising kids, and raising kids that do have some resilience. Obviously, you don't want bad things to happen to your kids.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some of the people who end up being the strongest people in life have been through some horrible things.
Yes.
And that's not what you want for your kids. And so trying to build that fortitude and courage and resilience in a kid who's never been exposed to anything bad is really difficult. And you have to really be conscientious of a parent of how you're giving your kids exposure to things that can help them grow.
I think the outdoors is just so unique in that regard. I'm just such a proponent of experiential education, and especially outdoor education. And I feel like one of the many, many great things about spending a lot of time outdoors and having to learn to fend for yourself outdoors is you get very quick feedback on your decisions. And there's a turn, if you're not wearing the right clothes, or if you go out wearing a bunch of cotton clothes and when you should be wearing synthetic, you're going to get really cold really quick. And if you get wet, you're going to get in trouble really quick. And if you don't eat enough, there's instant feedback that you really can't get in a lot of other parts of life. Because the results of your actions may be delayed by days or weeks or years. And at least for me personally, I mean, I had it almost, I had it easy as a kid. And I've found that going out and really getting my ass kicked hard in the mountains is where I feel like that's where some of my the most significant personal growth I've had comes from. So, I mean, the fact that you're raising those kids out there in that, and they're already at age 8 and 10 and have been for quite a while, having to, learn to operate in the outdoors. I mean, that's huge. Did you always think you would have kids? I mean, was being a mother always part of the plan, or did that come about later in life?
No, I spent most of my younger life thinking that I wouldn't have kids.
What changed it?
Well, when I married Jason, he really wanted to have kids, and he had one son already from a previous marriage, but together he had his first son when he was young. And, I think he talks sometimes about how much better of a parent he is now that he's an older parent. And, when he was young, it's hard. You're not as financially stable. You're not as patient. You're not, there's a lot of benefits to. And I think for me, part of it was just maturing myself and feeling in a better place to deal with a child. But I'm not a particularly mothering kind of person. Women are funny. There's some women who that's all they can think about. They just want to be a mother. And for me, I'm not like that. Now, when I did decide to become a mother, which had a lot to do with feeling like I was with a really good partner to have kids with, which is a big decision when you have kids. It's a life-altering decision to have children. And if you don't have a good partner to do it with, it's going to make your journey through parenting a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So feeling that I had a very good partner to do it with, I think probably was the main reason.
How did you and Jason meet, if you don't mind me asking?
I was working as a horse wrangler on a ranch, which I did for a number of years. And it was a ranch where the SEAL snipers have a contract to come and train doing their sniper training. And so that's how I met him. I was taking SEALs out on horse rides on their stalks through the mountains and stuff. And Jason immediately announced to everyone after he met me at the ranch that he was going to marry me.
Did he really? Like, that's true?
Yes,
that's not an exaggeration.
Nope. The people who worked at the ranch, he met me, and then that evening he told them all that he was going to marry me. And then he made that his mission. And SEALs are pretty adamant on their mission succeeding.
Yeah.
So he stuck with it and eventually convinced me to move down to Southern California with him, which was a hard decision for me, being from up here in the wildlands.
That's really cool. One question I had about you and Jason is, for the majority of your marriage, I would guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that he would be in the United States training, and and you guys would get to spend time together, and then he'd take off and be gone on missions for months and months and months at a time, and then he'd come back, and so you had this routine established, and it obviously worked well. And as having kids, it worked as part of that process as well. And that takes and I've heard Jason on other podcasts talk about what a badass you are and how strong you are to be able to shoulder a lot of that, everything that comes with being a parent while he would be gone. And now then he retired, and now he's working in consulting, and you guys are probably, I would imagine, spending a lot more time together. And that's kind of a completely different setup for a marriage than what you had for the majority. How has that transition been?
Well, I feel like I was always pretty well suited to be a military spouse because of being independent, and I started farming, and that kept me busy while he was on deployments and stuff. And I really sort of, in ways, I appreciated his long absences as a way to sort of build my own independence. I think a lot of people don't ever get that. They get into relationships and marriages, and they They never really get to build their own independence fully. And so I actually appreciated it in a way. And I've always been sort of a strong believer in absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Uh-huh.
And that's worked really well for Jason and I. We've really done well with him being traveling. And I have always been very conscientious to never make a big deal about it to the kids, which I've seen other military families do, where when dad goes on deployment, it's like, oh, dad's leaving us again. This is terrible. Dad's gone. So, and it's like this huge sort of guilt trip thing. And the kids that, like I talked about before, when you talk about negative things around your kids, that's what they take in. And then that's what they think about. And so I never, ever made it like that. It was always like, this is dad's job. He's gone. It's normal. No big deal. We'll see him when he gets back. And so my kids adapted to it very well. Like, it was never an issue.
Yeah.
Dad's going on deployment and he'll be home. So once Jason retired, he was still traveling a lot doing leadership consulting until the pandemic hit.
Yep.
And yeah, this last year he's been home a lot more, doing a lot more virtual gigs and stuff. And it is an adjustment. For me, it's like, it's been wonderful having him around. And I think he's really hit a point after a 30-year career as a Navy SEAL where he spent most of his life traveling all the time. He's really happy to just be here planting his trees and riding his horses and kind of living this calm lifestyle. I think it's really suits him well. And we have enough space where I go out and ride horses and he goes out and do things that we still are away from each other a lot. If we start to get on each other's nerves, we go out into the woods and enjoy nature. So it works out for us.
Yeah, it seems to be working. So this is kind of a funny question, but I've heard him, he just talks about you. I've heard him on Jocko's podcast a few times, and he talks about you with such great admiration. And, there's so many people in the world, myself included, who reads all these damn books trying to figure out, I want to be like a Navy SEAL. I want to learn from these Navy SEALs. But it's clear that Jason has learned a lot from you. And you don't have to speak for him if you don't want to, but what do you think, like, what lessons do you think he has learned from you, whether it's about parenting, about marriage, about just a way to approach life? Because from listening to him and then just from seeing how insightful you are on so many things, what do you think he's learned from you? Like, how is he different now than he was when y'all first met?
Well, I always joke that I had to toughen him up when I met him. No, I think we have learned together. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes our relationship so great, is we have grown and evolved together. And we always challenge each other. We don't always agree on the same things. We don't always think the same way, which I've come to really appreciate. I've come to appreciate having this sounding board for every thought and idea that I have bounces off of him, and likewise with him towards me. And we call each other's bullshit when it's there, and we challenge each other to think about things in different ways. And because we respect each other, we don't always agree, but we're able to work through ideas and thoughts on things. And we have grown together tremendously as humans. And I absolutely love that. I love having that as a relationship. And I think he used to be a lot more just sort of quick to jump to conclusions or to anger and things like that. And my sort of calm peacefulness, I think that's definitely something I would say that he's learned, to sort of slow down and take a moment to process things without just jumping to the conclusion of the first thing that pops into his head. And, my love for the nature and the wilderness, I think he's always had that to an extent, but he grew up in Southern California and he spent most of his life, just in the military going places. And so having me sort of draw him away from all of that into the wilderness has been both something that he loves and also I think really sort of healing for him, coming from a 30-year career as a Navy SEAL in all these crazy conflicts to just sort of be at peace in nature.
No, that makes perfect. Well, it makes perfect sense for me being very far removed. I can't imagine that kind of transition really. Can you talk about, are you willing to talk about your book project that you're working on now? I know some people don't want to talk about things until they're done, but I really admire your writing and I'd love to hear kind of what you're working on, if only if you're willing to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit. I think it's been a challenge for me. It's essentially a memoir. I think that's the hardest thing that I could have possibly picked to write about is myself. Through this process, I've wished many times that I'd written about anything else, that I could have written a novel or anything else, because writing about yourself and your emotions and feelings, and then also trying to write about your family and people in your life and trying to balance all of that and not hurt people's feelings and make it something that is a worthy project that you're putting out. It's been difficult, and I want it to be something good. I really have put a lot of myself into it and really care about it. So it's taken me a long time. It's definitely a slow grind, but I'm close to it being where I want it to be.
As we were talking about before we started recording, I mean, I can't think of anything more difficult. I mean, even writing a history book, I mean, that seems unbelievably challenging to me. And then when you're writing about yourself and your emotions and people in your life, I mean, oh man, you're a lot tougher than I am. That's, that's crazy. So I keep talking about your writing. Would you say that how much of your writing ability do you think comes from your love of reading? I mean, do you think reading a lot is a mandatory part of being a great writer?
I mean, I don't know if it's mandatory. Maybe some people just innately have it, but I would say it definitely has got to help. One thing with writing, I think a lot of people get caught in sort of imitation writing. You know, they read something that they like and then they try to imitate that. And that's a really hard thing. I think finding your own voice and finding what works for you is a difficult process. I never went to college. I never took a single creative writing class or any kind of writing class in my life. And in ways, I feel like that's a real benefit to me because I don't have all these sort of rules and restrictions on me saying this is how it has to be done. In other ways, I kind of wish, I wish I'd learned a little bit more about some of this stuff. I'm completely self-taught based solely on what I have read and what works for me. And then I write from the heart. I just write off the cuff. Most things that you see that I post online, I have a thought, I write it down, and that's what it is. Some things are better than others, but I've stopped being afraid to put out things that I write on social media. And that comes a lot from just so many people being so supportive. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's another one of those sides, like we talked about with social media being a real benefit. While it has its negative sides, you sort of find your tribe, you find people who like what you have to offer. Mm-hmm. And I know that what I write doesn't work for everybody, but there's a lot of people who've just been so incredibly kind to me. And so many people told me over and over again, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. That finally I was like, well, maybe I do need to write a book. Mm-hmm. And, that really comes from people responding to just little things that I put out. And I really appreciate that. And it's actually kicked me in the butt to write a book.
Can you talk a little bit more about that social media, about your relationship with social media? Because we discussed it before we started recording, but I thought it was very insightful because obviously there's a lot of upside to social media. I mean, you and I wouldn't be talking without social media, and I've gained a lot from your photos and your writing and just learning about how you and Jason do things, and it's definitely enriched my life. And, as people who listen to this know, I talk trash about social media, but that's kind of silly because it's really added a lot of value to my life in a lot of ways. So how do you approach that when you're putting out these very personal, creative aspects of yourself into the world. How do you think about social media?
I think that you have to be careful with social media. Like I told you earlier when we were talking, I look at social media as a daily exercise in self-control and detachment.
Uh-huh.
Can I look at all this stuff that's presented in front of me? And it's a lot. And can I detach from it and not get caught up in the emotion of something that's put in front of me on a screen, and really use social media to enhance my life instead of detracting from it? Unfortunately, a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people let their emotions get out ahead of them and get caught up in all these battles on social media, and they, their biases that make them want to believe things that they see even if they aren't true, and all of that. That's the negative side to it. But if you can detach from all of that and you can channel it as something positive, I think it's an amazing tool. You and I are talking right now because, a number of years ago, I don't know, I saw your Instagram, somebody or a podcast. I think maybe when you were just new to podcasting.
Yeah, I think it was.
And I started following you, and I've been following you for a number of years. And you followed me back at some point. And we have this connection now that is beneficial to my life. And anything that I put out on social media, I try to make sure that it is also either an enhancement to my life or to somebody else's life. I primarily use Instagram, and Instagram is, for me, I use it for inspiration. I pretty much only follow people who inspire me. People who I feel like I have something to learn from. They take beautiful photography. They write something amazing. They do podcasts. They have really brilliant thoughts. They have something that I find inspiring about them. And that's what's presented in front of me every day, instead of all the garbage that we let social media become if we're not careful. And so I find that as long as I'm able to manage it correctly like that, it is definitely a benefit to my life. And for my kids, my daughter, they won't have social media until they're much older. But I think about when they do start to have it, my daughter can also, because I will teach her that that's the best way to use social media. She can have all these amazing role models, and my son as well. But I think girls are particularly susceptible to getting caught in that, like, I have to, be beautiful and wear skimpy clothes and get, the attraction thing to have people pay attention to me.
Yep.
And having her have all these amazing role models through social media, because there's awesome women out there just doing incredible things, whether they're climbing giant mountains or they're running ultra marathons while like breastfeeding their kid or doing crazy things. And that my daughter would never see that and never know that. But now, like, social media is something that she can actually have connections with people like this who are doing this incredible thing. And I hope that it can actually, at some point when she's older, it can be an inspiration to her the way that it is to me.
I think if I had to summarize, the way you use it, you use it with the spirit of generosity. Like you're offering up things about yourself and about your family and things that you've learned through reading. And it's this, and when I look at it, it adds value to my life. It's not just some like silly self-indulgent picture or something like that. I feel like everything, and I think, through watching you and watching other people, I mean, that I've tried to take that same posture, both with the podcast or with anything I put on social media. For the most part, I want there to be a reason why somebody would look at it, and like somebody look at it and they are able to, if it resonates, they're able to apply it to their life. So say somebody reached out to you and they've got a story they want to tell, or they want to open themselves up more. They want to offer something to the world. I mean, what it would be your advice to somebody who maybe has some creative impulses, has something they want to offer, but they're nervous about revealing themselves, because you've revealed yourself in a big way, and it has resonated with so many people and really been life-changing, both, from your initial podcast with Jocko all the way up to, the great list of quotes that you put on your Instagram yesterday that I wanted to screenshot all of them. So, I mean, how do How do you, what would be your advice to somebody who is nervous about putting themselves out there?
Well, growth is uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's good.
And you should never let fear hold you back. It's really important to me to get as much out of my life as I can, and to always remind myself that my life is indeed my life. And I want it to be as full and encompassing as it can possibly be. And so if I am not doing something, if I feel like, I'd really like to put this on social media, but maybe people aren't going to say nice things, or maybe, hey, stop yourself and go, well, why would people not say nice things about this? Mm-hmm. Is it something, am I putting out a good message? If I am, no one should say anything bad about it. And B, why am I letting my life be made smaller by the fear of being judged by other people?
Mm-hmm. And I think another lesson in there from that is that for people to understand that you do go through the process of thinking that even though you've had success with this and it's impacted so many people's lives, like you still, those thoughts still come up. And just before we started recording this, I was up there talking to my wife and I said, I don't know why I still get so nervous before these podcasts. And I think when people listen, they think I'm just kind of laid back and talking and having these conversations. But I get super nervous because I want it to go well. And I think anybody who's doing anything creative and putting themselves out there in one way or another, unless you're like a crazy narcissist or something, or just really full of yourself, you're gonna be a little nervous. And I think that it's almost like a signal. All right, I'm nervous. This means I must be getting ready to do something worthwhile. I don't know though. Who knows? Well,
yeah, it shows that you care. You should be nervous. I mean, you care. You don't have to be fearful to do it, but if you care, then you're going to be a little bit nervous because you want to put out the best thing that you possibly can.
No, I agree.
But it's a fine line on worrying too much about how people will react or judge you, and then letting that stifle your creativity or what you want to say and do. So I try to approach everything as fearlessly as possible like that. I'm not going to worry about how people will judge me. Now, sometimes I have occasionally gotten critiqued on something that I've written or put out, that your initial response is to be defensive and be like, oh, they're completely wrong. But I really, really try, because it doesn't happen that often to me. When it does, I try to really take a step back and go, could I have said that better? Am I excluding somebody? When I'm saying this, am I making somebody feel excluded or like I don't care about them, that certain group of people or something? How can I reach the most people in a way that everyone is willing to listen instead of shutting people down? It's one of the things that we struggle with so much with social media right now, is the sort of shutting one group out too much. And it's, I try as much as possible to build bridges. I feel like you can't influence people if people quit listening to you.
Correct.
And so if you may not agree with everybody, but if you just throw a wall up between you and them and say, I'm in this camp and you're in that camp, they quit listening to you. Mm-hmm. And, ultimately, if you want to do good in the world, if you think that you have something to offer to maybe make people better or think better, you need to keep those bridges of communication open, even if you don't necessarily agree with the other person.
I think that's always been true, but it's more important now than ever. I mean, I feel like people are just retreating to their own little corners, and it's those hard conversations. We need to have them. Who do you admire? And it could be authors you've read, could be artists, could be people that you know personally. I mean, who would you consider to be your heroes, mentors, a handful of people that have positively impacted your life outside of, obviously Jason and immediate family?
Oh, well, you can go back to books, of course. I think some of my favorite authors growing up were Steinbeck and Ken Kesey and Edward Abbey. And, some of those people had a real part in building who I was. I look to anyone who I feel like is putting out good, positive messages. I don't like getting caught up in drama. I don't like getting caught up in just negativity. And so Jocko has been a really big mentor to me. I know him personally, but his podcast, I think, is really, it's a great way to think about things. Podcasts have been an amazing influence in my life. I listen to so many of them, and I hear so many people that are talking about things that I never would have had exposure to. And so anyone who challenges me sort of emotionally, and yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of people out there. It's hard for me to pick just a few that inspire me.
No, I mean, and I think when you read as widely as you do, and I try to, I think it can really be hard to pick one or two, because it's this just kind of mix of all these different things that goes into this recipe and makes you who you are.
Yeah.
One thing I want to follow up on what you said was the thing about positivity. I try to do the same thing on this podcast, like, cause you read, like, for example, High Country News, and it's just, I mean, I'm not trying to trash High Country News. I had the former editor on High Country News, but when I read it, I get down, because it's just this laundry list of everything that's going wrong. And there's a place for that, and there's a need for that. Obviously, I mean, I don't want to be somebody to put my head in the sand, but I've made a conscious effort on this to keep it positive. And I'm not a positive person by nature. Like I would say it's almost like I'm trying to convince myself to be positive. And I got the email list that I put out called Good News from the American West. And it's like, I told somebody, like, I'm going to force myself to be positive. It's the last thing I do. And why do you think that positivity is so important when there are so many bad things that happen, as we all know? I mean, I think you and Jason have seen some of the worst of humanity, yet you want to focus on the positive and not get just hung up on this negative shit. So why is that so important versus getting in the weeds and wanting to fight and complain and highlight every single thing that's going wrong in the world?
I think you have more impact through positivity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you want to make changes, well, like I was just saying before, if you focus on the negative, people will start to shut you out.
Yep.
They don't want to hear it. Think about when you're around somebody who all they do is complain about all the stuff that's going wrong. You're just like, oh, get me away from this person as fast as I can.
Oh yeah. And I've been that person and seen people leave.
Yeah. It's much more effective to engage people through positivity. Now, environmental conservation is a tough one, right? Because you're right. You can say, this is all terrible. There's so much stuff going wrong. Look at all these animals that are going extinct, and forests that are being cut down, and rivers that are being polluted. And there's all this stuff that you can focus on. But you're not effective when that's all you do is just, it's all bad, it's all bad, it's all bad. You have to also highlight the good things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you pretend like the bad isn't there. You're fully aware that it's there. You just are going to be more effective even in your own mind if you're thinking about things positively and how we can affect positive change instead of just thinking about the negative stuff. So I think, it's all mental control. I am, like you, not naturally a positive person. I'm a huge skeptic. I'm always like, I don't know about that. I'm always, it takes hard work for me to focus on everything in a positive manner, but I think it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And it's not, putting on the rose-colored glasses and just pretending like everything's great. It's just how you interact with everything in your life. If it's in a positive manner, you will be a happier person, and people around you will want to be around you more,
mm-hmm.
and you will influence more growth.
Have you ever taken the Enneagram personality test?
No.
It's this personality test, and they put you into one of 9 categories. And when you said you're skeptic, that's my Enneagram personality type, is the loyal skeptic. And so I'm very, very loyal to my crew, and I'm very skeptical of things. So it wouldn't surprise me if you were in that same bucket, because it's, I think it's good. I think it's good to have skepticism. And I think, but to follow up on what you said, I think the thing about not putting on rose-colored glasses is so important, but also, being very aware of all the challenges, but looking for solutions. And I feel like a lot of what you've talked about, and especially with your parenting style, you're very aware of all the challenges that face kids these days, but rather than just dwell and complain, you're finding a solution and you're coming up with these very intentional ways of raising your kids so they can operate within the reality of this, sometimes challenging world we live in. So I think it's super inspiring to me.
Yeah, that's the difference between complaining and facing a problem directly and dealing with it, right? Is finding a solution. It's very easy to just complain about everything that's bad. It's a lot more challenging to find a solution for it. But complaining about everything bad never gets anyone anywhere. And in fact, it's another sort of mental exercise of mine to stay on top of myself and ask myself every time I open my mouth if I'm complaining. And if you have that sort of dinging in the back of your head as you speak, there's a lot of times where you'll catch yourself complaining. And you stop that. If you get out in front of it and stop it, you'll find your life just improving.
Oh yeah. And I've found that I did something one time. I saw it online where you put a rubber band on your wrist, and every time you complain, you snap the rubber band on your wrist. And the thing I was taken aback by was how much I was complaining, and I didn't even realize it. And I imagine I missed a lot too. I didn't snap myself as much as I should have, but it's just breaking that cycle, because it is a cycle, and it's a bad habit in a lot of ways. And I'm telling you, I think people who listen to this have a different opinion of me than I have of myself. But like, if I can turn into if I can force myself to be positive, I really think anybody can, because that is not default for me. Do you do any sort of mindfulness exercises? I mean, you seem so self-aware of these things. I mean, is meditation a part of your life, or is it are you just introspective?
No, I don't do any meditations or anything like that. I sort of look at riding horses and being in nature. That's sort of my meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being quiet and at peace with yourself out in nature. I don't feel the need to do any special sort of thing. I just need to get myself into those situations. And then being introspective, it's just I think it just takes work. It just takes being, like you brought up all the quotes that I posted on Instagram yesterday, and I oftentimes will read and collect quotes and things that resonate with me, and will reread through those and take time to think about them and how they apply to my life, or how my life can be better because of them. And that is introspection, and it takes time and it takes work, but I like it. I like to always be challenging myself to be better.
I know the feeling. It's not, it's like hard exercise, it's not comfortable in the moment, but if you do it enough, you get to where you enjoy that discomfort, and good stuff is going to come from it.
I also, with my kids, I try to be so communication, I think, is the number one thing that you can have with your kids, with your whole family, really with everybody.
Yep.
If you can communicate well, everything in your life will go better. And so trying to teach my children how to communicate and be introspective and things like that is a challenge. And one thing that I find helps tremendously with my kids is I started calling it a family council. So like once a week, having a family meeting, and we call it the family council. And in that meeting, including the kids in the whole discussion, what's going on with our family? What can we do better? What did we kind of slip on this week? And letting the kids actually partake in that, not in saying, they can critique Jason and I. And then also picking a topic to discuss. And it can be anything, it can be the universe. It could be empathy. It could be courage. It could be anything that is interesting, that makes their little brains think.
Yep.
And having discussions like that is a tremendous way to connect with your kids and to get them thinking critically about things and to make them feel like they have an important place in the family. And they're not just little people that are in the way that you're, picking up their crap all the time. And like you're including them in these big, important topics and discussions in the family. And, that's part of my tactic for raising, hopefully, intelligent human beings.
I'm going to borrow that if you don't mind. I think that's
absolutely,
that's great. I mean, I think that's wonderful. And in my incessant reading of biographies, and I'm so interested in people who have done things outside the box. And one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people who go on to be leaders, particularly in politics, they grew up in households like that, where there were hard discussions, whether it was around the dinner table. They'd bring up a topic and have a debate and make everybody take a side, or just that the parents really gave the kids space to have an opinion and to have to defend it and to have to think things through and treating them like maybe not like an adult, but giving them some responsibility. I think I've never heard it put so succinctly like you did, but my youngest is too little for that right now, but I think we could have some interesting conversations with my oldest. So I'm going to try that tonight, actually.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I'll tell you, anytime things start slipping around here and I start noticing the kids' behavior getting bad, and I'm like, oh, why are you guys being so bad? And sometimes this doesn't have to be a set thing. Sometimes on a spur of a moment, I'll be like, all right, it's time for a family council. And as soon as I set those kids down and we open up a discussion in a set meeting sort of way, all of a sudden I can bring up the behavior like, hey, why are you guys giving each other such a hard time over this? Why are you fighting over this all the time? All of a sudden it's like putting it all out on the table in an open form of discussion, as opposed to just yelling at them that they're being bad.
Yep.
It cleans up their behavior incredibly well. And if you do that on a regular basis, to me, it's one of the most important parenting tools that I've found.
Well, it gives them ownership, all of a sudden they're not just this subservient person they're a member of the family, and
Exactly.
You should write that. You should write that out. You should write like a little ebook or something about that. Like that. Don't take too much time because you got other writing projects to do. But like that's really powerful. Seriously, I'm going to try it tonight.
And one of the other things that I've really noticed, particularly with my daughter, did you say are both your kids girls? Both
girls, yeah, almost 6 and almost 3.
Particularly with my daughter, but it's easy to overlook with my son, but I think it's equally as important, if not more important for him, is to see me having my own life and my own passions for life, because they're these little sponges. They take in what you are. And if they don't, like my daughter sees what I do and she wants to emulate me.
Yep.
She says, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write a book. Now, she believes that she can do that because she sees me doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Or she says, I'm going to be a wildlife photographer when I grow up. I'm going to work for National Geographic. And she believes that she can do that because she spends all kinds of time out in the wilderness with me taking photos of things.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I'm going to be a horse trainer when I grow up. And she believes that she can do that because she sees me out training horses. And it has made this vast impression on me how important it is to show these kids what they can be through your own actions and your own passion for life and the experiences that you have yourself. I take time and I go on backpacking trips and I go ride the horses, and I'm just like, hey, I'm going to go do this. And they see me having my own independent life. I think so many mothers particularly just lose themselves in motherhood. There's a number of years where women really struggle with that, with just losing themselves in motherhood. And I want to set an example for both my daughter and also for my son to see that he can expect to be with a woman who has her own unique and individual life. And it's a huge responsibility on me, I feel like, after seeing how much my daughter tries to emulate what I do, I want her world to be big. And that comes from me and how I live my world. And I have to live my life fearlessly, and I have to not be afraid to take on challenges and to go do the things that make my life fulfilling to me. Mm-hmm. And, boys, they need that example just as much to expect that of their partners in life. So it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot as I watch my kids grow and develop a little bit, how much we influence them based on just our own behaviors.
Oh yeah. And there's no faking it. You can talk about it all day, but unless you're living it, they know. I mean, they'll know the difference. That's what I've found with having kids is just from like a completely selfish standpoint. I'm so focused on setting a good example for them that I'm a much better person because I know these people are watching me and it's going to affect their whole life. And it's like a ripple effect. And what I do now is going to have these effects for decades. And so, I mean, maybe think I'm the center of the universe too much, but I really, that is my thought is like, they're watching me and I cannot be a slob. I can't get mad. I'm hard on myself I'm probably too hard on myself about that, but I want to be the best version, not bullshit me, telling them something. I want them to be able to watch me and learn from it in a good way. And so the byproduct of that is I'm a lot better off than I was before my first daughter was born. I think I'm a better person than I was.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I feel like kids have challenged me to be the best version of myself that I can be. And, if you really care about being a good parent, raising kids is hard. It's really, really hard. It doesn't come natural to me to be super mothering. And yet I want to do such a good job at it that it always highlights anytime I do something that I'm not proud about. Mm-hmm. If I yell about something, it highlights that and makes me adjust myself. And so, yeah, they're a great sounding board for how you live your life and how you can be better.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, we are coming up. No, we're over an hour. Can I ask you a few quick questions that I like to ask everybody, and then I'll let you get back to your writing? I don't envy you having to do that.
Absolutely.
What are your favorite books? You mentioned Steinbeck. I just read Grapes of Wrath for the first time. Holy shit.
How'd you like that?
I loved it. It made me furious. And then it's made me look at everything differently. Like I was riding my bike on this bike path and I saw this homeless encampment soon after reading it. My first thought was like, well, I don't understand why that's over there. But then I started thinking about Grapes of Wrath in the 1930s, and they were on the side of the road in encampments that they had to build. And it made me much more compassionate about the whole thing, and then mad because in some ways not much has changed. But I loved it. What are your thoughts on that book?
I, first read it when I was a teenager, and I don't think it had nearly the impact on me as when I read it later in life. And I reread it a number of years ago when I was fully immersed in farming. And it really struck me then sort of how the whole Dust Bowl came about and how our agricultural system, led to some of that.
Yep.
And then I'm like, why don't we know about this more? There were almost 500,000 essential, American citizens who were like essentially refugees in our own country that headed out to California, and they were starving to death. They were living in encampments. It was just crazy.
Yes.
And it really impacted me a lot more when I read it as a parent, as a farmer, as just an adult who saw it differently than when I read it as a young person. And I love Steinbeck. I think I've read every Steinbeck. When I was a teenager, I just absorbed everything Steinbeck. And, he writes about the American West, right? It's California, but I think one of the things with Grapes of Wrath that made it so impactful is that he was writing it at the time that it was happening. And, that's a special look into something and capturing it in sort of a novel form as opposed to just a history book. I think it touches you in a different way.
It definitely does. what do you like better, that or East of Eden? Because I've heard people seem to be hardcore one way or the other, that it's either East of Eden's the best or Grapes of Wrath. I have not yet read East of Eden.
Oh, I love the story of East of Eden, but I look at East of Eden more as just a novel that I love. You have to read it. But I look at Grapes of Wrath as more this crazy bit of history from this country. And so I honestly, I wouldn't even compare them.
Okay.
They're different. East of Eden is brilliant though. And Steinbeck talks about in East of Eden, it's something that stuck with me because it's written as a novel, but like he talks about himself in there a little bit too. And he talks about being a boy growing up in Monterey, I think, when they came through and were putting Japanese people in internment camps and stuff. And he has this really powerful scene in there where he's a little boy with his sister. And there was a Japanese man who was a shopkeeper in their little town. And he'd been there forever and had his little business and was just an American citizen. And when World War II came around, everyone started calling him names and no one would buy anything from him. And John Steinbeck writes about being a little boy with his sister and going out on the street and like throwing rocks at him or something. Wow. And yelling something derogatory towards him, and how that was like one of the most shameful moments of his life as he grew up as an adult and realized that he had done this to this poor man who had, lived there and was just a little business owner. There's just things like that are really interesting little bits of history that Steinbeck captured in an amazing way.
I've found myself during this pandemic, all of a sudden I'm reading a lot more fiction than I ever have. I've generally hardly read any, but some of the lessons you can get are so timeless. And like you said earlier, I mean, it's better than anything you could get out of a straight up history. Because I'd read a bunch of books about the Dust Bowl and they were all good and I learned some stuff, but I mean, they didn't have me reevaluating my thoughts on homelessness in Colorado Springs. It's deep stuff.
A lot of people discredit novels. I think you can learn just as much, if not more, based on more sort of an emotional connection from novels than you can from nonfiction. So I definitely don't discredit novels at all. I think that they're an amazing source of information and connectivity more to the human emotion than you'll get from a nonfiction book.
What's one other novel I should read? Any subject.
I have so many that I love. Have you read The Brothers K? Not
No.
The Brothers Karamazov, The Brothers K.
No, and people continue to tell me I need to read it, and then they say I need to get him on the podcast, which apparently he's got a new book coming out. Yeah, and so I need to read that. Yeah,
read that. The Brothers K by David James Duncan. It's definitely one of my favorite novels.
That's going to push me over the edge. That's when I had Mike Foote, he's a professional ultra runner, on the podcast, and he went on and on about Grapes of Wrath. And he was, he had so many people had told me I needed to read it, including my wife. And I finally was like, all right, I'm going to read it. So I'll do that with Brothers K, because I'm not that dumb. Like people don't need to tell me 1,000 times, only 999.
It's funny how sometimes we kind of push off certain books, I'll tell you another series of books that I think is absolutely brilliant and amazing. And a lot of people are like, whatever, it's a kids books, is the Harry Potter books.
Mm-hmm.
They're an amazing story of good versus evil. And, the first couple, she did a brilliant job because she started out with writing them pretty basic so that kids that are 8, 9, 10 years old can easily read them. And as the books progressed, there's 7 of them. They got more and more in depth and more adult themed. And with kids, I highly, highly recommend listening to I actually recommend listening to them. Jim Dale is the narrator on Audible, and he does an amazing job reading the audiobooks of Harry Potter. And it's one of the only books that I would say listen to it as opposed to read them. But reading them is listening too. So
no, that's great. And my oldest she's a really good reader. It's kind of bizarre. I mean, because I don't even think I knew how to read by the time she's by her current age, and she's already cranking through books. And so that'd be fun.
I think that a lot about my kids. I'm like, you guys are so much smarter than I was at your age. Like I don't think I was reading novels. I definitely wasn't doing like fractions and long division and stuff. And
oh, I know.
I don't know what it is.
It's crazy. It's really crazy.
We're kind of a lot dumber, I think. Yeah. Kids are, yeah.
I'm definitely like, it's just a matter of like probably a few months before my oldest is like much smarter than I'll ever be in my entire life. Well, so last kind of big question, you've listened to some episodes of this podcast, which I really appreciate. And the type of people that listen to this they just love the West in one way or the other, whether it's through writing or art or conservation, and they're it's crazy, but they're all over the world. And so, with your unique set of experiences and everything you're working on and trying to do, I mean, do you have any words of wisdom for the people who listen to this podcast? Something that you kind of a final thought you'd like to leave them with?
Oh, words of wisdom.
This whole thing the whole thing is words of wisdom. So if you don't have anything to add, no problem. There's plenty in here. I think
one of the biggest things that I've learned in my life based off of my experiences of having kind of some dark things go on in my childhood, and then, dealing with some hardships with a husband who was a Navy SEAL who's been in some really difficult experiences and had some PTSD type things from that, and from just the accumulation of some difficult things in life, is that we don't have to be damaged by things. Mm-hmm. I think we have this feeling, in our society that if something bad happens to you, you're damaged by it. And I have come to this just deep realization that if we can believe that we don't have to be damaged by bad things that happen to us, our lives will be so much better. And I try to instill that in my kids too, that like there will be hard things and bad things and traumatizing things that will happen to you. And you don't have to let them damage your life. You don't have to carry this stuff around as baggage with you forever. You can be a whole, healthy person who still experiences this. I don't know if you've ever heard Jason on a podcast talk about an experience where he was in Iraq, I believe it was, and saw a bunch of kids get blown up by a bomb right in front of him. And it's just heart-wrenching and horrible, and it will bring him to tears every time that he talks about it. But it hasn't damaged him. He takes it and he uses it to be a better person and to care more and to be more empathetic towards people. And that's just something that I like to put out there, is so many people let themselves feel traumatized and feel damaged by life. And you can channel all of that stuff into something positive that can help other people and make the world better. And I hope that more people realize that they can do that.
That's wonderful. And that's just a super insightful, inspiring message. And, I told you, I greatly appreciate you coming on this podcast, but really, even though we never actually met, the fact that you chose to put yourself out there and tell your story, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, and that it's made my life much, much better. And it's not an exaggeration. It's amazing the power of these little screens we have in our hands when they can be used properly. And so I really appreciate everything you do and your family does to put this good stuff and this useful stuff out in the world, because there's a need for it. And I can only imagine if it's helping me out, there's just, the ripple effects go beyond where you'll ever know. And so thank you for everything you're doing. And it's really an honor to talk to you.
Well, I really appreciate that, Ed. And same back at you. Conservation is dear to my heart. I love nothing more than the wildness that we still have and are trying to hold on to in the American West. And so, any way that we can help keep that and hang on to that. And, you doing all these podcasts and bringing together all these amazing people who are fighting towards that cause. I'm really glad that you're doing that, and that's out there, and that there's people out there that are putting that much time and energy into trying to save our wild places.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.